What's up, my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is the new version of my Business Casual deck reviews. Now, for those of you guys who weren't around back in the day when I did these regularly, my Business Casual deck reviews are one of my favorite segments that I have ever done, whereby I look at a current tier 2 or a future deck and I play around with it for about a week and a half usually. I test the deck and I talk about the things I like and dislike, some of the advantages and weaknesses of the deck, and then I usually give a tech of the week based on things that can potentially help it with some of its weaknesses, and finally I give it a business casual rating as to whether or not I actually like the deck itself. So I am bringing this back. I'm going to try and make the videos shorter, but also cover more categories. And this week, I decided that I would try out the Rulersworn deck, also known as Lightsworn Rulers, or as I call it on my Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro account, Lord of Light. Because, I don't know, I like Game of Thrones. Anyway, so this week I tested the Rulersworns, and I found this deck is crazy. It's gotten a lot of attention recently because it's the first Lightsworn deck that we have seen in a long time that actually sees play on the major circuits and regionals in YCS, even a couple of people playing it at ARGCS recently. So this deck has been receiving a lot of attention, even though it hasn't even gotten to some of its best cards. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about is the strategy of the deck. I'm going to talk about how the new cards that are coming out are going to help it. Then I'm going to talk about what I liked, then what I disliked, and then I'll talk about my techs of the week, and finally I'll give it the rating. So the thing about this version of the deck is it's a Lightsworn variant, which solves the biggest dilemma that Lightsworns have always had, which is that you want to set up for JD, but you don't want to mill your JD. You want to have access to your JD without the potential of milling it, and that was a really big problem for Lightsworns. They had to balance putting Lightsworn monsters in the graveyard without having to lose advantage in order to just get a JD to their hand. Now this deck actually solves that problem. Why? Well, because the milling actually becomes more access to JD in the first place. It makes it more likely that you can get the JD to your hand via Eclipse Wyvern and the Dragon Rulers. Eclipse Wyvern is probably the most important card in the deck, besides of course Judgment Dragon, because it allows you access to both Judgment Dragon and Light Ray Diabolos, which is actually almost as important to the strategy as the Judgment Dragon itself. Now the way the deck works is that you try to actively mill as much as possible in order to put Eclipse Wyverns and Dragon Rulers in the grave. The Eclipse Wyverns, when sent to the grave, banish from your deck either a JD or a or a Light Ray Diabolos. Those cards then get added back to your hand when you banish that Eclipse Wyvern for the summon of a Dragon Ruler. You can then get crazy OTK potential out the roof. Now the advantage in the newer cards that are coming out from the deck is twofold. One is that with the release of Raiden, you don't have to run nearly as many random names that aren't necessarily the optimal option for the deck. Raiden is a really freaking good card because it gives you active milling potential, which means that if you summon it with Lumina, you get extra milling before you use its tuner ability to go into something like Michael, which will give you more milling ability, or into Black Rose, which is super easy to make in this deck. Nuke the board and set yourself up for an OTK later. Michael is another really important card because it gives the deck plays without running into Judgment Dragon. If you have access to Michael, you actually have plays to make even if you don't have Judgment Dragon. Now the other thing about this strategy between Michael, the Rulers, and the Light Ray Diabolos is the fact that you can go for rank 7 Xyz, which once again, if you do not have the Judgment Dragon available, still means that you have plays that you can make. Michael can get his banish, then you can summon your Dragon Rulers, go for some swings, go into a Dragasack, set yourself up for some defense for when you do get those Judgment Dragons and put things on the board, or you can even grind the deck out. So what did I like about this deck? This deck has OTK potential through the roof. I'm talking about to the level where if your opponent doesn't OTK you, chances are you're going to OTK them because it sets up its OTK plays so quickly with the sheer bulk of milling between things like Gareth and Lumina and Raiden and things like that. And if you add Minerva in, that's another card that reduces the inconsistency of the deck because it means that you're running fewer subpar monsters like Jane or Raikou or something like that. I still run the Lila and one Raikou. I'm thinking of replacing the Raikou with Wolf. I don't really like Felice because she doesn't have a very good chance of getting milled to the graveyard during your main phase and being able to use her effect because she has to be milled by a monster effect in order to get summoned. But like I said, the OTK potential for this deck is through the roof. This version is also a lot more consistent than the last version. You're much less likely to get really bad hands. I also just generally like it because it is a Dragon Ruler based deck. This deck has crazy amounts of power, and you can grind through your opponent's back row very quickly and still have enough plays in order to make an OTK because of the Dragon Rulers. You just have so much special summoning ability and so much destruction ability all in one deck that that back row is really not an issue, as you will see in the games that I am showing you in front of you on this screen right now. So what's really the problem with the deck? Well, the biggest problem with this deck is defense. If this deck, in order to get the amount of offensive power that this deck has, it has to kind of fudge its defensive power. It doesn't have a whole lot of it. And that's because you have to be able to make room for the sheer amount of offensive power. Which brings me to one of my texts of the week, which is the inclusion of Rainbow Karibo. That's the card I was trying to think of. Rainbow Karibo is a really weird card that's recently showed up, and a lot of people have been making fun of it, but I actually think it's a really good option. I do still run the classic Necro Gardenas, which are very good for this deck, but the nice thing about Rainbow Karibo is in the case of your opponent trying to OTK, it can accomplish the same thing as the Necro Gardena. However, it is not nearly as much of a dead draw as Necro Gardena is in the classic build. The Curry Bandit, or not the Curry Bandit, sorry, the Rainbow Karibo. Curry Bandit is also a very good card for this deck. The Rainbow Karibo allows you to stop plays from your hand. So if your opponent is going to attack one of your monsters, let's say it's a Lumina or a Raiden with one of their monsters, and you put the Rainbow Karibo on that monster cannot attack. Then later, once the Rainbow Karibo gets detached from that monster, you can use the Rainbow Karibo to stop another effect. So it's like Necro Gardena in its defensive capabilities, however, it is much less of a dead draw. The other major issue I have with this deck in terms of play quality is the fact that it has zero grind game. Aside from the Dragon Rulers, which run out of fuel fairly quickly because you don't run things like Burial from the Different Dimension in here, you don't have a lot of ways of loading up the graveyard with dragons later in the game. So aside from the Dragon Rulers, you do not have much of a grind game in this deck. You run yourself out of big plays fairly quickly if you, say, mill your big boss monsters, which is a potential possibility. It's less likely because of Eclipse Wyvern and because you have multiple boss monsters that are searchable with the Eclipse Wyvern. However, it is a potential thing that you mill your boss monsters and then later on in the game do not have anything to do. So one of my other texts of the week is Beckoning Light. Now, Beckoning Light has seen a lot less play recently than it used to. It used to be that Beckoning Light was just a card that you ran in the Lightsworn deck, but it isn't necessarily as much anymore. But I absolutely love it because I find myself later in the game running out of boss monsters because they're all in my graveyard. And if I have Beckoning Light, I can pitch a bunch of dead cards from my hand, like late game dead solar recharges, things like that. I can pitch those from my hand to get JDs, and that's huge. So those are my texts of the week. And finally, I have to give this deck its business casual rating. In all honesty, even though I love the fact that it is a Dragon Ruler deck, it kind of makes a mockery of Dragon Rulers. Dragon Rulers are really just used as a way to put JD on the board, and you usually blow them up before you get the chance to use them. So even though the fact is true that they are a Dragon Ruler deck, they don't use the Dragon Ruler strategy to the way that I like it, which is a much more toolboxy strategy. I love Dragon Rulers normally. I normally think that they're extremely business casual, but in this case, they're just used as a tool to put JD on the board. So I have to give it a kind of business casual rating because of the sheer linearness of the deck. Now, with the added potential to make Michael and Light Red Diabolos and some of the Xyz monsters, that linear strategy kind of diversifies a little bit, but not really enough to make it the kind of business casual deck I would hope to be. So I might pick up this deck just to play around with it for a little while, and then of course sell it eventually. But for now, I don't see it really being as much fun as I would like it to be. So that is my review on the Rulersworns Ruler deck. I hope you guys like it. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, let me know if you guys want to see more deck reviews, what you guys want me to see me review in terms of tier 2 right now or future decks that could be coming out. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.